All right, hello again. My name is Wade Smith. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the advantages of Isshinryu Seisan stance versus Shotokan front stance or rear stance. And I'll show the differences as best I can. I'm going to have to adjust this camera a little bit, I think, to get my feet in. All right, so hopefully my feet will be visible in the video. All right, so focus on my feet, not my head so much. But Isshinryu Seisan stance, your feet are roughly shoulder width apart. Your rear toe is aligned with your front heel, and your toes are actually slightly pointed inward in Isshinryu Seisan stance. This is also about the same as the standard guard stance that most MMA fighters now use, and it's been part of Isshinryu all along since before MMA became a thing. All right, so what is the advantage of this stance? It's very close to a natural walking gait, so we call it a guard stance or Seisan stance. Seisan means 13, by the way, or it's sometimes called guard stance. In Shotokan karate, I don't like the Shotokan stances because they're too deep. The highest stance that Shotokan teaches is a front stance, which is about this deep, and you have a very elongated back leg that's more or less like fencing or eskrima. I don't like this stance for karate without a weapon, as long as my opponent doesn't have an eskrima stick anyway, because most people are not fit enough to hold a correct front stance for very long anyway. It hurts your legs. All right, that's the first criticism I got of this stance. The second criticism I got is you're not very strong from side to side. You can be easily swept. If you have to stand up to leg check a sweep from here, you're screwed because you're way off balance from your back leg here. I don't know why they think this is so great. The other alternative is a rear stance in Shotokan, which is kind of the opposite. And now this has the opposite problem. All right, and then I have to hold all of my weight on this one foot in an unnatural position. So I much prefer, and I have studied Shotokan under a Shotokan 7th degree black belt for some time. And basically, I wouldn't recommend much of anything he taught, even though I learned it all. I wouldn't recommend it. I can demonstrate the differences, and I can explain why I prefer the Isshinryu way anyway, even though I understand that there are traditional differences. And there are situations where the Shotokan way might even be the preferred way, but by and large, I would rather practice the Isshinryu way because I can think of more applications to the Isshinryu way than the Shotokan way, which is why I didn't stay in Shotokan for very long. Sensei Mark Myers, was a 2nd degree black belt in Shotokan, and he also taught us Shotokan on a couple occasions just because we were bored with Isshinryu, not just to show you the alternatives to Isshinryu and to have something new and improved to do or new and different to do in class. So you always have a preferred way of doing everything, and you always have a second best way of doing everything, and you always have a third best way of doing everything. And so let's just say, for example, joint locks, just to give you an example. Some joint locks flat out won't work on some people for whatever reason. They're either resistant to it naturally or because of their profession. Maybe they're a concrete or bricklayer, in which case they have a really strong wrist and the front wrist lock probably will not work against them, although the full wrist lock does work against them, but the reverse wrist lock won't work against them generally either. So the point is there's a preferred way of doing everything, and then there's a second and third way to do everything. I would prefer a Seisan stance for fighting because it's a lot more natural. It's easier to move into my cat stance to get that front snap kick off. It's easier to move into a cross stance when just circling my opponent and changing guard. Let's say I fight switch, so I fight equally well southpaw and orthodox. So it's a lot easier to change from a left front Seisan to a right front Seisan by simply taking one natural step forward than it is to change from a left front Shotokan front stance here to a right front Shotokan front stance. It's like a gigantic step that you need to take if you want a switch stance. Um, so those are some of the advantages of the Seisan way. And then while I'm on the topic of Seisan, what does Seisan kind of teach? It teaches fighting multiple attackers in 2 dimensions. Some attackers coming from front or rear, some attackers coming from side to side. So you have like these, you have these different blocks. You got like a block here that's open-handed, and you got a block here that's closed-handed. And there's different applications because you're going to block and grab and pull into a punch, and block and grab and pull into a punch. And then you're going to turn and block another attacker and throw a kick, a front thrust kick, or it could be a front snap kick. Either way, depends on how your sensei taught it. And then I believe there is one or two, if I'm remembering correctly, there's one or two Seonchin stances in Seisan, even though it's mostly Seisan. There's one or two sequences with Seonchin stances, which this is the deep Isshinryu stance, but it's only used when grappling. It's not, you're not intended to strike from a Seonchin stance, although you can. It's intended to be a grappling stance for giving you a deeper base. Perhaps you've already taken your opponent to the ground and you're striking down to finish them off. All right, so now you're closer to your target. That's a reason that you might want to use a deep stance. I lost my phone. Hope it didn't break anything. I don't think it did. All right. All right. So, of course, you got the kicks in Seisan Kata. You got the pull into another punch to the abdomen in Seisan Kata, which again, it can be the solar plexus, it can be the throat, it can be the groin. You can be punching into the groin, which, of course, you got 30 different groin strikes. Well, unfortunately, realistically, you might, depending on the situation, want 30 different groin strikes. I can oxbow strike to the groin. If I broke my fist, I can still use the back of my wrist to hit the guy in the groin. All right, or I can use the back of my wrist to hit the guy in the throat. All right, that's called an oxbow strike. We assume somehow you might have actually broken your wrist because you were a dumbass and didn't punch correctly. Well, now you need to know the second way of doing things is if you broke your own hand, you can still oxbow strike, and it hits just as hard. It'll hurt your opponent, it'll hurt you some, but that's kind of like the last resort, actually. But so again, there's a preferred way to do everything, and there's a second or third best way to do everything. I would prefer that you do the preferred way. Practice your Isshinryu vertical fist punch, which again, we can throw 1, 2, 3 as fast as a boxer can throw 2, and hit our target in the solar plexus. And that's where we get into what we call Isshinryu continuous fist. It's a concept where we want to hit our opponent 2, 3, maybe even 5 times without even resetting the standing guard. Let's say, on this reinforced punch that I discussed earlier to the solar plexus or the groin or the bladder, you can go pow pow. All right, so you hit down into the bladder or the solar plexus, and you immediately roll into a back fist, and it can even be a reinforced back fist. You immediately roll, so you go pow, pow, and I'm in a cross stance here. All right, what do I do from here? Now I've knocked them back a bit. I'm in a cross stance. Let me get in a better cross stance right about there. I can throw a side kick to them as they're being knocked away, finishing them off, or at least knocking them off of me. Perhaps there's a second attacker coming, so I need to get that guy completely off of me for a bit. And then I can turn my attention to my second attacker. When I set down off of that side kick, I can cock in and throw a back kick or a back angle kick, whatever is more convenient. So that's the concept of fighting multiple attackers. And so I did say earlier in the video that I was going to discuss how to beat multiple attackers. How did I, as a third degree brown belt, beat my sensei's second degree black belts? And I became his best student. Only reason I didn't get my black belt is, again, I had to quit for college reasons. But I should have quit college and got my black belt in hindsight. But how was I beating his second degree black belt students? Because he taught me how to beat them, but I already knew how to beat them. Um, you use the body mass of the weaker one against the stronger one. All right. So when I get my front wrist lock on my first attacker, they attack me from a 90-degree angle over here. What they should have done is work together and get close to one another, which they did eventually start trying to do, and I could still beat them anyway. But when they start apart from one another, the lightweight is over here and the heavyweight is over there. They come in at the same time, initially unarmed, because they first started doing the multi-attack drills with the black belts on me whenever I was a third-degree brown belt, and I could already beat either of the second-degree black belts in one-on-one. So they started putting 2 brown belts or 2 black belts against me simultaneously. So the lightweight, I'm going to get him in a front wrist lock or a full wrist lock or a reverse wrist lock or a full side arm bar as quickly as possible. And the heavyweight is coming from that direction. I'm going to keep the lightweight's body here between myself and the heavyweight. So the heavyweight is kind of negated. I'm going to have him in side arm control or front arm control, and I'm going to be throwing front snap kicks and thrust kicks and knee strikes into his abdomen over and over again, and cranking kicks. It's going to be cranking kick, cranking knee, cranking kick, and cranking kick, and cranking kick. And this guy, if he tries to come around, I'm just going to move his body mass here between me here and there. Whenever the lightweight eventually gives up and taps out, I'm going to throw him to the side or throw him into the heavyweight. I might decide, screw this, I don't want to fight a heavyweight second degree black belt. I'm going to run. But you know what? It's Matt. I can beat him anyway. All right. So now let's Matt. You know I can beat you one-on-one. All right. All right. So that's the basic technique of how you beat a one-on-two self-defense scenario, and that's trained attackers. That works against trained attackers. That doesn't just work against idiots. It works against anybody. You pick the lightweight and you take him out as quickly as possible, get side arm control on him, use his body as a human shield between yourself and the other attacker, and you crank and kick, combined striking. We call this combined striking, Isshinryu continuous fist, knee strike, kick, cross heel stomp kick to the side of the knee, taking that knee out. If it doesn't work for the first time, go ahead and step on the back of your opponent's knee and just crush their knee to the ground, boom, like that, and stand on the back of their knee if you got to. All right? Stuff like that. So continuous fist is also just the concept of, obviously, if we throw between 3 and 5 counterattacks at our opponent rather than just 1 or 2, we're more likely to land several counterattacks and actually do real damage to our opponent and take them out. So that's why we want this Isshinryu continuous fist. We want this cross punch from the hip to the solar plexus, front punch, front cross, or front jab to the solar plexus, step in again, cross again. So that's like 3 punches straight into the solar plexus. True story. Around the time that my sister was a no-stripe purple belt in Isshinryu, she was being harassed by, she was in the 9th grade in high school, and she was being harassed by a 12th grade senior who was a offensive lineman on the high school football team, varsity football team. And he kept touching her and talking to her, and she didn't want anything to do with him. And she told him never to touch her again. And he touched her one more time. And so she drilled him about as hard as she could with an Isshinryu vertical fist punch straight into the solar plexus, and it knocked his wind out and put him to his knees. All right. And that was one punch. If she wanted to hit him again, she could have knocked him unconscious. And she was about 115, 120 pound, no stripe purple belt at the time. Now she goes about 135, fully grown, and is a second degree brown belt. Although she quit for college reasons too, to be honest, is when she eventually quit. but I mean, personally, I should have quit college and finished my black belt. But that's a true story. That she actually defended herself. I've never actually had to defend myself as an adult, although as a early teenager, I defended myself a couple of times from school bullies. But she had to defend herself as a 14-year-old high school freshman girl against a 12th grade high school senior uh, offensive lineman from the football team. I guess he learned his lesson because he remarked that he had never been hit by a boy that hard, and she drilled him in one punch, floored him. So yes, a woman can in fact defeat a heavyweight even in one strike if she hits him full force in the right location at the right time. Um, uh, and yes, whenever I was, we've actually had cases of women ranked as low as blue belt in Isshinryu karate, having learned Seisan kata, successfully defending themselves against two male attackers. That's right, we've had women successfully defend themselves against two male attackers while being ranked as low as blue belt in a gang rape situation. So that's Seisan kata. That's why we have these turns with the block and the punch and the kick, because we're teaching the student to fight in more than one dimension against more than one opponent. Uh, and so this block, there are no true blocks in Isshinryu, but every strike can be a block and every block can be a strike. This block can be open-handed. It can be closed-handed. Uh, it can be a back fist to the side of the temple as you're turning. It can be a karate chop to the neck or collarbone as you're turning. It can be a low block because the situation is less than what you expect it to be. It might be an incoming kick, in which case you're going to block with your fist here. It can be an attack against the femoral artery on the inside of your opponent's leg. Let's say you turn into their kick and step in, and you hit the femoral artery, and the inside of the leg is, for most people, or I mean like 99% of people, is less conditioned than the outside of the leg because it never contacts anything. It's very sensitive, and your biggest blood vessel other than your aorta is artery other than your aorta is the femoral artery. All right. So if you hit that femoral artery and you hit these sensitive nerves and muscle groups that are impossible to tone correctly on the inside of the leg, your opponent is going to be stunned by that. Their leg is going to go limp. It's like jello. Believe me, I've been hit there when I was a first degree brown belt. I was hit there by Matt when I wasn't yet able to beat Matt. Um, it hurts and it makes your leg like jello. Um, all right, so that's Seisan kata. That's a little bit of bunkai related to Seisan kata. In other words, just because the kata that you memorize has the block here or here, open-handed or closed-handed, and the punch and the kick, doesn't mean that the bunkai has to follow that exactly. The bunkai can be a low block. It can be the high block. It can be that block, whatever you turn into the attack coming into you. And so, and then of course, every block, an example of a high block becoming a strike is this high meaty block that we use in Isshinryu, over the head meaty block that we use in Isshinryu karate. You're at a 45-degree angle here, all right, above your head and out in front of your head, so that your fist doesn't get crushed down onto your skull. All right. Well, this can be a strike under your opponent's jaw. All right, as you rise up, and then you can uppercut to the body or uppercut under the jaw, and so you get like this Isshinryu continuous fist notion there. So every block becomes a strike. Every strike becomes a block. You throw combinations from whatever position you're in, rather than looking for the ideal. Although yes, there is a preferred way to do it. We're going to throw 3 to 5 strikes and counter strikes rather than 1 or 2. And we're going to use every block can be a strike, every strike can be a block to our advantage. All right. Thank you very much. I would rather the person learn a few moves that work than 500 moves that don't work or whatever. A few moves that work and perfect them, rather than learning every move in the book. Because you know um, Bruce Lee once said something like he'd rather you have one kick that you practice 10,000 times than 10,000 kicks that you practice once each, or something of that nature. So it makes sense to be an expert at a few very effective moves than to try to learn everything that ever existed. All right, that's why we teach white belts, five swords, and sword of destruction, and the basics first, but especially five swords and sword of destruction, so they at least have something that works very effectively by the time they become a yellow belt. So by the time you become a yellow belt in Isshinryu, you ought to at least be able to win a schoolyard fight, or something like that. All right. Thank you very much.